of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Clerk, you please call the roll.
Will do. Alderman Redpath.
Here.
Alderman Senor.
Here.
Alderwoman Shermer. Here. Alderman Fulgenzi.
Here.
Alderman Proctor.
Here.
Alderwoman DeCenso.
Present.
Alderman McMiniman.
Here.
Alderman Tylen.
Here.
Alderman Donelan.
Here.
Alderman Hanauer. Mr. Chair, McQuorum is present.
Thank you. I'll accept a motion for approval of the June 11th, 2018 Public Utilities Committee meeting minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Here none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the ayes have it. We have 3 presentations, which I was told by the director that it's going to be really short. But we'll go ahead, Director.
So basically we have 3 presentations, and the first one up, we're going to do a financial presentation. Then I'll turn over to Greg Yake, who's going to talk about our line clearance program, as well as how we monitor our underground cables and the rebuild of those systems. And then we'll get on to basically our integrated resource plan for an update, and then how we incorporated our public comments into that. So kind of moving on to the presentation. So this is through July 31st of this year. Electric cash position is $30.9 million. We're, according to our internal calculations, that's 57 days of cash. But if you look at Moody's, they include the internally restricted fund of the Environmental Regulatory Initiatives Rebate Fund, which is that $15.5 million. So that brings us to 76 days. And if you look at our, basically a requirement of 60 days, we're almost there for our internal calculations. So we're definitely exceeding it with Moody's, and you can see how we've increased it over the last 2 fiscals.
Just real quick question. So you're saying that we've got working cash of $30.9 million, then on top of that we've got $15 million in the environmental fund. Is that
in addition, right?
57.
76 with.
Basically for cash that we can access, but we can't use the ERIRF unless you guys authorize us to. So it's not really, I wouldn't consider it working cash.
right? I understand. I'm just saying that in reserves, though, in the 2 funds combined, we have therefore, what was the total?
30.9 for electric.
And then we've got in reserves 15.5 for the environmental.
Correct.
Compliance fund?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So our revenues for electric and wholesale sales are down, and you can kind of see here what months they're occurring. Basically, it was in March and in July. Weather did have an impact. Those were cooler months than what we anticipated, and you can see the revenue was slightly down. Expenses are under budget, and part of that expense is because if we're not running the units as much, we're going to have lower fuel costs, so our expenses are going to be down. And here you can see the expenses. The expenses per month compared to this fiscal and the budget year, as well as the past fiscal for actual. Debt coverage ratio, that's 2.29. And if you include the pilot payment or the corporate payment, that's 2.06. And that's what the rating agencies actually look at. That's why we include both of them. But as far as our bond coverage, we are required to have a 1.25. So with our electric fund, you can see there where we're at with our debt coverage ratio from this fiscal and the last 2 fiscals. And then the Environmental Regulatory Initiatives and Rebate Fund, we were asked to include a graph basically showing where we're at with that fund. So that's a new graph here for everyone. The cash position for the water fund is $6 million. That's 94 days of cash. on hand. With the 60-day mark here, you can see that we're above that, and then also for each fiscal. However, you can see that the actual cash on hand has dropped over the last 2 fiscals. And then you can see, just for historical purposes here, you can see where our cash balance for the water fund was and where it's trended up, and now we're trending back down. Revenue for water was slightly up, and our expenses are under budget. Here you can see the revenue, for the months where basically we were able to bring in some additional revenues during the summer months.
Doug, going back to the water fund cash history, does this cash history take into account money owed back and forth between water and electric with each other, or is it just stable numbers, all receivables?
Well, I know now there is no money back and forth.
Right, there's none now, but I'm looking as this goes
you know
back.
that, Chris?
Cash balances on this are adjusted for the payable and the receivable to and from the.
Okay, so it accounts for anything back and forth between
It's
the two.
the true cash balance. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And here you can see our expenses for this fiscal compared to the budget, as well as last actual fiscal. The debt coverage ratio is 2.12. Again, we're required to have that 1.25. And then here's a graph of the historical debt coverage ratio for the water fund. And our labor costs for the water fund and electric fund are under budget. Any questions?
Here are no questions. You want to move on to the next one, which is the electric line clearance stuff? Is that what we're doing next? Yep.
Then I have Greg Eagle come up here.
Hello, I'm Greg Yakel, Director of T&D. T&D stands for Transmission and Distribution. What I want to cover this evening is just a little about the transmission distribution systems, some fundamentals on it, the transmission system, a little about the distribution system to kind of give you an order of magnitude as to how large the distribution system is in the city of Springfield. And then I want to talk to you about CWLP as a reliability company. There are a lot of reports that kind of float around that talks about rates and everything else. But I want to make sure we understand that we're a reliability company too, and we're charged with providing reliable service to our customers. So we'll cover some common benchmarks and stats in regards to reliability. We'll talk a little about a segment of reliability that talks about equipment failures, specifically underground rebuilds, and we'll talk about everyone's favorite subject, line clearance. I'm sure everyone's heard complaints about our line clearance and tree trimming program, and I'll touch briefly on that. Just some fundamentals of the electric transmission distribution system. The transmission system is a high voltage system. It's a bulk power system. It's a system that generators, such as the Dahlman facility or the Clinton plant, will inject power into the transmission system, and then from that transmission system it either moves regionally, or in our case it moves down to distribution substations where we take and transform that power to a medium voltage or distribution level, and that is takes it down through neighborhoods in the city, okay, and goes to the little green boxes out front, which step it again down to a voltage that's usable by the customer. This is just a picture that kind of shows our transmission system. The red system's the 138 system. It surrounds the city. And then we also tie to other utilities up in the northeast corner. We have facilities that go all the way out to Lanesville, Illinois, that we maintain. And in the southwest corner, we have a line that extends through Chatham down to North Auburn, Illinois, we maintain. The blue system, or the 69 kV system, is a sub-transmission system. It radiates inward to the center of the city from the 138 system, and it also is available at the power plant, where we have 2 of the smaller generators on that system, and then the 2 larger generators are on the 138 kV system. This is a map of our distribution system. What you see in the orange there is the geographic area we serve, okay? Our customers are all within those boundaries shown there. It's a service area that consists of about 80 square miles. It has about 500 miles of overhead, 450 miles of underground, so we're almost half overhead underground for our distribution systems alone. We maintain 41,000 poles to deliver and transmit power within the city. We have over 71,000 customers, and we maintain over 17,000 streetlights and over 4,000 security lights. So our first benchmark we'll talk briefly about, that's a pretty standard industry benchmark, is what's called SAFE. It stands for System Average Interruption Frequency Index. This data for other utilities is the utility pulls it annually from the Illinois Commerce Commission and represents 10 years of data. Over CWOP, you'll see it says 0.96, so on average, annually, 96% of our customers will experience 1 outage. That's an average. There are some customers that experience no outages, or some that experience 2 and 3 annually, okay? This is just a benchmark that kind of compares us as far as interruption frequency to other utilities. Another standard benchmark that's used in the industry is CAFE, so it's a Cavor, Customer Average Interruption Duration Index. Here again, this is 10 years worth of data that the utilities consistently pulled off the ICC website to be able to benchmark us against other utilities. On average, a CWOP outage will last 84 minutes, okay? And then you see the other utilities to the right there. Let's dive down just a little deeper. Not only do we keep track of outage frequencies, durations, but we classify those outages, okay? Starting at the top, going from about noon to 1 o'clock is our squirrel and rodent outages. Squirrels, we have problems with on the distribution system, the overhead, and then the underground tends to have problems with either, skunks, groundhogs, mice, and those kind of things that get into pad-mounted equipment and undergrounds. In fact, we just had a large outage on the southwest side of town because of some mice that had gotten into a switchgear. The next pie piece you'll see is vegetation. It's red. It takes up a good percentage of all of our outages. And these numbers that are shown here are customer hours. So for vegetation, for example, with 29,426, what that means is we've had, if you were to oversimplify it, we've had 29,426 customers have 1 hour of outage, okay? Obviously, we can't, 1 outage of 29,000 customers is not likely, but that's how we develop the customer hours by classification. We have then lightning and wind. Here again, we design our systems to be able to handle lightning, but under certain conditions, they don't always necessarily work exactly the way they're designed. And then lastly, we have distribution equipment failures, which can take into account pad-mounted underground equipment, poles, and those kind of things. And that's the one I'm going to segue right into next. Okay, there's a lot of data here, so I don't want to make anyone Excel spreadsheet gurus by any stretch, but I just wanted to show that we have tools to kind of track and monitor subdivisions. This is just one piece of many tools we use, but what's interesting from here, and I didn't pull all the table over, is we're monitoring 35 subdivisions, all built in the 1970s. Those 35 subdivisions, on average, are 45 years old, okay? So they are quite old. And just near the top, the first row there, that actually project was completed this last winter. The Westchester one, our guys have been working on, and we're hoping to get that completed by this winter. And then our guys are working on the third one there because of the developers working on redoing that development piecemeal. So we'll work with them on that. And then, of course, Indian Hills you approved a couple weeks ago. Line clearance. Here again, everyone's favorite subject. We get a lot of calls on this. We maintain over 600 miles of overhead line. It's equivalent from driving from here to Atlanta, Georgia. Okay? We spend about 2.3, 2.6 million annually. And based on those expenditures, we cover about 100 miles a year, which is to say we're on about a 6.5-year cycle. Now, I don't want to get down into the minutia of what a cycle means, but there's a couple things that we need to realize from that. 6.5-year cycle means if we're trimming trees or clearing trees in a yard tomorrow, we won't be back there for 6.5 years. Okay? As a result, because of that frequency, we end up having to take considerably more material a lot of times than we would others, I guess. So just something to know there. This is a graph by a consulting company that does benchmarking across the U.S. for line clearance programs. The two red bars you see in there are CWP's 5-year average and CWP's most recent year. All those other bars represent other utilities and what they spend annually on vegetation management relative to the number of customers they have in their system. Okay? You know, if you look at that from that standpoint, we're straddling, you know, probably the mean there. But on average, we're spending less per customer than a lot of those 36 other entities. A little bit more about line clearance. Some of the pruning rules and regulations we follow are listed there. Our arborist, Carl Tega, the maintenance supervisor. He's a licensed registered arborist, as well as Danny Rhodes is the supervisor over the Nelson crews. We actually additionally do some trimming on trees that aren't necessarily line clearance related. So when I talk about line clearance, we talk about reliability, okay, and safety. However, when individuals hire a contractor to come in and trim a tree on their property, sometimes they are not able to do their work because of the proximity to the power line. So we will come in and actually trim that tree to a point to where a contractor can safely take that tree down. On average, we are doing that about once a week.
Can I ask you a question while you're there?
Yes.
Just so happens I have a organization that bought a lot that probably hadn't been paid attention to in probably 30 years. And they're having some problems with the line clearance. So how would one go about getting that area looked at and taken care of? Because it's residential on one side and it's the open field on the other side, which was purchased. So, I mean, there's also phone lines and cable lines, and then the power lines. So it's kind of like a shared responsibility. So would you all be responsible for something like that, or would they have to contact the other two entities also?
You probably don't need to contact the two entities. You can get a hold of us, and we'll work through our line clearance supervisor, Carl Tega, and he'll look at that. It's kind of a slippery slope. You know, he based on the years of industry or experience he has in the industry, you know, judging as to what all the contractor needs to do to trim and you know, how much of it we trim and then leave for them. There are some contractors, and I won't even call them contractors. I know we've had one incident where we had someone that was collecting a fairly reasonable sum of money from a customer and expected us to take the tree down to the ground. However, you know, the professional contractors, really we have no problem working with those, and it's pretty cut and dry. We don't get any complaints from that.
Thank you.
You good? This is my last slide, and here again, I don't want to make us Excel gurus, and there's a lot of information here, and I would probably take a little too much of Micah's time if I went into too much detail. But I want to explain a couple things. That leftmost column is the number of circuits we maintain, distribution circuits in the city, 103. We have to trim those out by that circuit to provide the best reliability. I liken a circuit to a distribution breaker in your house. You turn it off, and part of it feeds the kitchen, part of it feeds the living room, okay? If we go through that circuit and we leave one tree untrimmed, okay, these single circuits can sometimes carry power for 1,100 customers. That one tree that we would leave behind or instructed leave behind can result in outages for 1,100 customers, not just the one customer. One thing I highlighted about this particular circuit, it's a problem circuit that we've had, and here again, we manage and we look at our outage statistics all the time. If you look at this circuit, it's out of our Washington Street substation. It was last trim in April of 13. You see how we moved it up from the bottom of the list past many feeders that we last trimmed in 2012. You know, logically speaking, you would think we do the oldest first. However, because we always are looking at our outage statistics and trying to provide the best service to our customers based on the monies we have, that circuit was prioritized up over about 8 or 9 other feeders because of the reliability information we were seeing. So, any questions?
I have 2 questions. One of them is on this graph. So why is 2017, there's nothing there?
Which graph are you talking about?
The line charts. The very last one.
Last one.
2017, they're there. They're just farther up. This spreadsheet contains 103 rows. So I'm only showing you
Oh,
the
so
bottom
you're down.
portion.
Okay.
The yellow is where we're at right now. All the ones north of that have been done. So it's just, I didn't want to give you too much data.
Thank you very much. Chuck,
Okay.
why'd you let me ask that question?
Because you're co-chairman.
No, I have one other question.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, the outage classifications that,
Yeah.
so you don't need to go back there, but, so when you talk about duration of outages, is there a specific, length of time that the power has to be out before it's considered an outage? So like if someone loses their power for maybe, 3 or 4 minutes, is that considered an outage?
That would be considered an outage. There are standards that address that. Reclose events don't necessarily get categorized as that, and that's where your lights come off and then on real quick. Those aren't necessarily counted. There's other benchmarking, some MAFI standards and stuff, and things like that. But with the standards I showed, those don't show up in that, no.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Sure. Greg, this is very informative and helpful. I've got a couple of questions regarding slide 8.
Is that one?
The,
Underground cable failures.
yeah,
That one, yes.
that one. That's very informative. It kind of shows where the trouble spots are for underground. There's, on that list of 15 subdivisions, 3 are entirely or partially in Ward 7.
Okay.
Of those 3, the one that I get most complaints about is Country Club Estates. Now, particularly the line that's, not to get too much into the weeds here, but the line that's parallel to Gulf and immediately to the east of Gulf. I think it's partly above ground and then it goes below ground.
Right.
Is it possible that, can the above ground portion of that impact the below ground portion of that area?
As far as the reliability statistics, yes. As far as the customer's experience with the frequency of outages and the duration of the outages, that overhead lines and the underground lines both play a function of that. This particular tool is just tracking underground cable failures. So it's those small loops that come off that overhead line and kind of loop through the subdivision over to the overhead then that's on the west side of the development or on the east side of Veterans there.
Okay, I think it may be best for us to talk about this in more detail when there's opportunity, but just for your consideration, what I'm hearing is that the easements along there are, that gives the utility access to both underground and above ground are increasingly becoming inaccessible because of vegetation growth, fencing. There have been empty lots that are now being built upon, so the opportunity for the utility to get in there and do some upgrading is diminishing, and so I'd like to talk with you about that in more detail at another time.
Sure. That's not a problem.
Any other questions? If not, your own.
Thank you. Don't take too much longer than that.
believe Doug Brown owes you an apology. This is not a short presentation. On our agenda today, we're going to discuss, to the extent possible, the comments that we'd received from the previous committee meeting. We asked for some public comments. We're going to do a brief review of what the IRP process is and kind of where we are today, what we've done so far, and what we still have left to do. And we're going to spend a good deal of time talking about the considerations that are required to do an integrated resource plan. We're also going to take some time to discuss the other reports that have been floating around out there. So when looking at the public comments, we did our best as we went through them. We kind of found there were a lot of themes, so we did our best to organize them in some ideas. So some of our comments were, hey, as you go through the process, we want you to consider this. Or there were some comments on how we should or questions about the process, the resource preferences. So people just flat out told us, we want you to have this in your portfolio or remove this from your portfolio. There were a lot of comments that, actually quite a few that basically said, give the public a voice. What's your engagement process going to be? And we'll go through those. Some of them were flat out informative. Just, did you know this about the process or other resource options? Some were critical and some were out of scope. We will talk about the ones that are outside of the scope of an integrated resource plan. And then there were some others that don't really fit very, very nicely in those buckets. We'll go through those. Just a brief look at the overall profile of the comments. Some of the key things to notice right away is that over 80% of the comments we received were identified themselves with Springfield addresses. Over a third of them were identified themselves as Sierra Club, and over half were not affiliated with anything at all. So they asked us to please consider global warming, please consider the health impacts and the environment as you go through this process. They asked us to consider jobs created by coal and clean energy job creation as well. They also asked us to consider electric vehicles. With regards to the process, how to go through the process, they said make sure it's comprehensive. Make sure you're complying with all of the environmental regulations. Make sure that you're looking to diversify. And low-cost solutions are something that should be key in this process. Make sure that you're including all of the plant costs and revenues, not just some of them. So up until this point, I would say that CWLP has spent a great deal of effort up to this point, either making accommodations for these things or adjusting our scenarios and our resource options to account for these things. So everything up until now we've either adjusted or we had plans to do this to begin with. People also said keep it to a 6-month deadline. Well, we'll go through the schedule, but 6 months is a very aggressive schedule. We do have a schedule. We'll cover that later. And people asked us to perform it in-house, and obviously that's not happening. When people said, we want you to have these things in your portfolio, they said wind and solar or other renewables. Phase out coal and reduce your reliance on fossil fuels altogether. We would like to see more demand-side management and energy efficiency programs. Some people said, I want whatever resources give us the lowest cost. Include battery storage if it's feasible, and heck, market energy and capacity is cheap. Buy that. So they also said include natural gas and perhaps even require every new building or parking lot to be covered in solar panels. And lastly, include no wind. It's too costly. So it's very obvious as we read most of these comments that the public wanted a voice and a podium. And they said come to City Council and go outside of City Council. They said go into the community. And they said create a stakeholder advisory group and an IRP website. Due to our aggressive schedule, those last two are not achievable. And they also said please understand. Please understand all of these types of resources that are available to you and how modern IRPs are done today. They said fracking has problems too. Some were critical. The IRP process is flawed, or the model. The EPA standards are flawed, and projections are outright farcical. Time of use rates, there were a lot of out-of-scope questions. We've done our best to identify them and summarize them. And time of use rates, while it's a profitable discussion, it doesn't help us choose our next resources or how we move forward. People asked us for an update on the solar farm. We will do that outside of this venue. The ash ponds were commented on, and that's because that's a sunk cost. It's not material to the output. People commented on Lake Springfield and Lake 2. These things are outside of the scope of an IRP. This one, we racked our brains on a lot. We worked really hard on this. We were asked in several different ways to consider the health impacts of our decisions. It's outside of the scope, but we've done our best to make accommodations. The reason it's out of our scope is not because we wanted it to be. We tried very hard to do our best to make sure it was studied and quantified. The problem is, with an integrated resource plan, the methods that you use, it doesn't fit well. So we've done our best to make accommodations in our scenarios and our resource options, and we'll discuss how we've accounted for this. The Emberclear project, we already have a study that outlines the impact of that. Selling CWLP assets is not part of this report. And while comparing in these other reports is really not part of an integrated resource plan, we will have a discussion about them today. So lastly, they said, go beyond least cost. And I think that we may have muddied the water earlier. We are going beyond least costs. When you have an integrated resource plan, you get one objective function. You have to set it to be the common way is to do a least cost function. But you can constrain the models in different ways, and we're doing that. They said, account for extreme market volatility and be open-minded. I like this comment. We're working very hard to be aware of any biases that we might have. And we are trying to be very open-minded as we move forward. Will the Future Energy Jobs Act be considered? Absolutely. How will our comments be influential? Well, hopefully today we'll answer the question that they already have been influential. Plant debt is also immaterial to the outcome of an integrated resource plan. That money is already spent. Converting Dolman 4 to gas, and my personal favorite, have we surveyed our customer preferences? And I like this. It really shows that the commenter was seeing the big picture and how our customers actually feel about this as a whole. And I believe the actual question was, have we surveyed our customers to determine whether or not they're willing to pay more for renewables in our portfolio? Yes, we have. In 2016, UIS Research Office did a survey for us, and 36%, over a third of the respondents said they were willing to pay no more for renewables, which means that almost 2/3 of the respondents said they'd be willing to pay at least $1 or $2. And the middle is about $1 or $2 average. So what else did our customers say in this survey? Well, they said reliability this question was on a 5-point scale. Reliability is their top priority. Close behind that is affordability, and I was surprised to see that customer experience was highly valued by our customers in this survey. They also said it was important for CWLP to be environmentally friendly, but when you ask about local wind and solar options, they feel less strongly about that. So while they do feel it is important for us to be environmentally friendly, they think there might be other options is a key takeaway from this. So on the previous slide, and as Greg just showed you in his previous presentation, our reliability is envious. We do a great job. We only received 2 comments about reliability. And I think that that's because we've lulled our customers into thinking that reliability is a given. It is not. And if we're not careful as we go through this process, we can sacrifice that. And fact, 98% of the respondents of the survey agreed that we had reliable service. 9 out of 10 said that we were environmentally responsible, and 82% said it's affordable. So just a little bit about the process, why we're going through this process. Well, we have unprecedented load decline that we've never experienced before, and we're facing some significant capital investments in our plants to comply with some environmental regulations. So we're asking ourselves, in this environment with low energy and capacity prices, should we make those investments, especially given the continuing declining costs of alternatives like gas, wind, and solar? So TEA's definition is included here, but I want to really point out two very important words. These will be thematic as we go through the rest of this discussion. Comprehensive and forward-looking. It is critical to consider those two things. So again, as I'd already said, the objective function is least cost. There are many ways to constrain the model, and we're going beyond that. So what is the actual IRP process? Just a brief reminder. Well, you start with a load forecast. That's done. So what is it? Well, for 30, 40 plus years, as long as we have historical data for, we had consistent load growth. In about a little over a decade, that took a turn and started declining. And at this point, TEA has finished the projections, and they expect that trend to continue for the next 2 decades. In fact, their projections indicate that this will be a 25% reduction from our overall peak and a 15% reduction from where we are today. So after the load forecast is done, our consultant TEA turns to ABB's ProMod suite, and they begin to feed it a bunch of inputs and assumptions. And the idea of this is to get market-wide prices predictions. Well, it's done. This is cranking away. It is a very computer-intensive process. It takes a very long time. So while it's cranking away, we will be waiting a while for the output. When that step is complete, they turn to a different software product. They feed it plant costs, market prices that we've projected in the previous step, the load forecast that's already been done, and transmission costs that are necessary as you make these changes. You also give this particular software suite options to retire or add or change or make purchases. So what's done in this process? Well, as I've said, the load forecast is complete. We have evaluated the transmission that's necessary to make changes to our system, and we have decided on the portfolio options. We're nearing the plant cost turnover to TEA, and we're still waiting on the output from the previous step for market prices. So when that's done, we will get, for 9 different scenarios, an optimal portfolio, and a next optimal portfolio, and a third optimal portfolio. After that, TEA will come here, present the results, we'll open house, create an action plan, and execute it. And that all will take place in 2019. So we had some decisions to make from our previous June meeting. We had to decide on market scenarios and portfolio options, and we went to great length to consider all of the comments that we'd received. And so what were our scenarios, or what are they? Well, the first 4 cases are the MISO MTEP cases. These are cases that are already produced. We just have to adjust them and run them. It's a very vetted process. There were questions in the comments about the base case. Fortunately, we don't have time today to go over in great detail what these cases are. So I have provided a link for anyone who's interested in a description of how these cases, or what these cases are. We think it's critical to discuss, with the retirement of units 1 through 3, what does happen to the coal price of unit 4. I mean, we have limited options for coal resources, so we will be studying that particular scenario. We were also studying what happens if carbon regulation exceeds what we expect it to become. What happens if CWLP has more renewables, or we force ourselves to have more renewables in our portfolio? We're studying an additional gas price, as gas is a major influence in the output of this, and climate change. Basically, under the scenario of climate change, how do the models react to that? So, as you can see, there are several scenarios in here that we can use to account for health impacts and environmental impacts. And at the end of this, they may not be the best or lowest cost, but if we so choose to, we can place more emphasis on those particular scenarios. So we are giving the models the option to retire up to all 4 coal units. We're giving it the options to add wind and solar, to add gas units, both combined cycle and combustion turbine units. We have plenty of demand side and energy efficiency initiatives to plug into the models, and battery storage, capacity, and energy purchases. So in a nutshell, that's in a summary what we intend to give the models as options. So where are we at in the schedule? Well, today, I think at the very least, we should have a update somewhere around January where we should have some significant progress made. That's kind of to be determined. We're being as aggressive as we can, but as of now, the March 22nd, it looks like is the date that TEA would come here and present the results, and sometime in April, we would open house about the results, move forward from there. I think this is the universe's way of telling me I shouldn't speak for long periods of time. I get a little cotton mouth. So I think we need to spend a little bit of time discussing what are some very, very critical considerations as you go through an integrated resource plan. Well, you have to go beyond economics. Yeah, it's important, but there's so much more to consider. Like reliability. Are you willing to sacrifice that? Are you reducing your risk, or are you exposing yourself to additional risk? What are the alternative investments? Yes, if you retire units, there might be some savings, but what is the additional expense? You can't just look at the way things are today. We have to look forward. Are you considering things that don't show up today that would show up the day you retired your plants? Like, we would have to start paying for capacity and ancillary services. We cannot just look at energy costs. Avoided costs is a term that we're going to go through here in a moment. And are we considering all of the environmental and reliability metrics and standards that we need to follow? And a very critical question to ask is, what kind of access do you have to alternatives? So we know we have access to coal, but what else do we have access to? Well, if you look at this map, you can see there are parts of Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma that are so dense with pipelines, you can hardly even see what color the map is behind it. It's not really the case in central Illinois. Taking a closer look at our particular situation, we do have access to a couple of pipelines that aren't too far away, but even a pipeline of this distance can cost tens of millions of dollars. Do we have access to solar? Absolutely. As you can see from this map, it's no wonder that solar dominates the discussion in the Southwest. Wind is a good resource in Illinois. So we do have access to some alternatives. And when you look at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and their take on it, wind is a viable economical resource in Illinois. And when you look at this all-in map, it's no wonder that coal and wind dominate downstate Illinois' resource portfolio. So, apologize for this ahead of time, but I'm going to do my best to put you guys in the frame of mind of a utility manager. In order to do that, we're going to go through a couple of examples. So, when you look at a couple of stocks, you can see understandably, these stocks both pulled back and had negative gains in the Great Recession. We all know what happened there. And as you might expect, they both began to recover. This is a cautionary tale. We cannot use any of this information. This is useless. To use this information to try to make future decisions is a waste of time. Instead, we need to understand the fundamentals of what will happen. And as time goes on, these two stocks have vastly different stories. And this is the story of Sears and Apple. And if you don't understand the fundamentals behind those organizations and the decisions that they have in front of them, you don't have good enough information to make future decisions. So one more example. This is a very volatile stock, but the future projections aren't nearly as low as they are today. This isn't a stock at all. This is a natural gas price. For those of you who don't know, natural gas is the #1 driver of power prices by a huge margin. So when you're making a decision to invest in a coal-fired power plant, effectively what you're doing is you're squeezing your possible outcomes. Yes, you have a floor on what you know your expenses might be in the future, but you also have a cap. And this slide is for illustrative purposes only, so just try not to read too much into it other than the message. So when you overlay that with power prices, you can see there's some extreme volatility. When you have a coal-fired power plant, you're protected from these high prices. But the converse of that is when prices dip and go low, you have limited opportunities to take advantage. So if someone were to perform a study on this, I don't know, in this time frame here, I would say that's not very useful information. You really need to ask, where are prices going to be? Are they going to be the same? Are they going to go low? Are they going to go high? That's the useful question. So as we look back at gas prices, the main driver behind power prices, see that they're not expected to stay low. Projections are that they'll double in the next 10 years and more than triple by the time our integrated resource plan is complete, 20 years from now. So performing a study when natural gas prices are at an all-time low is not an effective method of making future decisions. Asking what the future holds is the useful question. So I know there's been a great deal of discussion about plant costs. 769,000 line items we've gone through manually. We've used technology to the extent possible. And still, after all of that, we still will not have our fixed costs because it's not a useful thing to look at. They don't matter, and I'll explain why. Instead, the idea that's prudent to making future decisions is the avoided costs that we're going to look at. So let's just run through that example real quick. We have a $600,000 bulldozer that's required to push coal around on the coal piles. It's a significant investment. We have 4 coal plants. An accounting method for fixed costs may be to proportion that based on a unit size or production. And in this particular example, you might say $60,000 goes to 1 and 2, $230,000 of that cost goes to unit 3 and the remainder to unit 4. So here's the flaw in that. You cannot look at your costs per plant. If you're going to be in the coal business, if you retire units 1 through 3, you did not eliminate any of that cost. The cost that you avoid is the valuable cost to look at. And instead, unit 4 now looks like it has a $600,000 cost. Any report that doesn't consider that and just thinks that when you retire a unit, all of your costs go away is untrue. In fact, that's an error right there in just the bulldozer of a $370,000 mistake. There are many examples. It's a gigantic effort to put these costs together in a way that's meaningful to us. So what is possible? We talked about access. Well, some of these other reports have made assumptions that we can just switch to market energy. I'll go ahead and say it's not possible. Can we move in that direction? Absolutely. If we retire units 1 and 2, we will need to make transmission investments. If we retire units 1, 2, and 3, we will have to make even more transmission investments. There are no amount of transmission investments we can make to solve the problem of retiring Unit 4 also. Unit 4 will require a replacement generator of equal or greater size. So to make an assumption that we can retire our units and move to market energy, it's absurd. It's fiction. So when we're looking at other reports, we have a lot of considerations. When we're looking at what we're doing, we're considering a lot. You have to ask a lot of questions that go well beyond economics. Do you even have access to alternatives like market power? I just told you we don't. We have limited access. Are transmission investments considered? So yeah, we can retire units. The costs don't all go away. In fact, you're adding some costs. What about reliability? It's our customer's top priority. Will we be sacrificing reliability? Do you have access to other fuels? Are your efforts forward-looking? What about risk? Do we want to subject ourselves to market prices? Or are you looking at fixed costs or are you looking at avoided costs? Not all of our costs will vanish. And some other things will actually magically appear, like the fact that we'll suddenly have to start paying for capacity and ancillary services, things that aren't currently on our sheets right now. And wholesale revenues, are we accounting for that adequately? So it's not that we don't want to compare these reports. At the end of this effort, we can't. They're very different. And I'm all in on our process. It's comprehensive and it's forward-looking. I think that's it.
Any questions of the committee? Okay, Micah, thank you. We're going to allow, let's move to citizens and request to speak. I think we have some people who want to talk. Is it all right if we jump into that next? Anybody have any objections to that? So there was some comments that people weren't able to sign up or something today, or so if somebody wants to address the council on some of the stuff, please step forward and state your name and hold on.
Anybody that did sign up?
We have one person, Ernie Nielsen, that has signed up.
Mr. Nielsen, are you here? You get to go first since you got to sign up. Please state your name for the committee. Keep your comments directed to the committee about the utility, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
My name is Ernie Nielsen. I live at 1322 South Noble Avenue in Springfield. And my reason for wanting to speak was simply to, reiterate one of my, data requests to the staff, which was some load data. I did get some load information on a monthly basis, and but I really, in order to do, and I'm a demand side type person, and I'm interested in reducing peak demand, is looking at the loads individually by the hour to see what types of, what components of the load are driving the peak. Like, for example, certainly residential and commercial have different bases for why they have a peak, but generally they're going to be related to air conditioning in the summer and probably heating in the winter. What I really wanted was to get some some hourly or daily load curves that basically describe what the load for each of the customer classes during each hour of that day, in particular the peak days or other days that are similar to peak days. And I have been having a little dialogue with some staff folks, and I am not sure whether they have that data. I know they published in the website information about the peak hour, peak summertime hour, sometime in July 21st of 2017. So I know they have hourly data. I just would like to be able to get some easy access to it so we could kind of look at.
Have you been denied any of that information?
But I guess denial is not the right term. I think it's been, they don't have it yet for, you know.
We didn't have hourly customer class, but
Right. Sure.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, we tried our best. The question was arranged in a way in which we didn't have some of the information. So I have your second request. We do have hourly information. And some of these technical guys can answer it better than I can, like maybe Greg. I don't know that our AMRs have the ability to break it down by customer class at peak.
That's what I thought.
So, but we do have, I think, hourly data.
Okay, that'd be good to have.
All
right.
Yeah, that's basically all I wanted to clarify and
Thank you.
get on the table. Thank you.
Someone next want to come up and please? Yeah. Please state your name and for the committee. Appreciate it.
My name's John Williams. I reside at 1427 South College Street here in town. I've got a couple of questions about public engagement.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second, John?
Yes.
So if your questions come up and they can't answer them tonight, I know the director's taking down notes and that we will get back to you on that. And I think they've been pretty good about getting back to folks. I don't know if people are missed opportunities, but is that correct? So if they can't answer them tonight, they will get back to you.
Okay. I was looking at the IRP contract with T and saw that T is to produce for CWP a draft report and a final report. The draft report in the contract indicated it was due within 6 months, and the delivery of a final report at the conclusion of the project. Now we have a hard date for the final report. That's the March 22nd, 2019 date, right? So my first question is, what's the due date for the preliminary report? I also noticed that the contract stipulated that CWLP could request T's participation in the presentation. I'm under the impression that that's going to be done also. But in addition to this, I want to know what the plan is for public participation in respect to these two reports. It would be helpful that that these reports are released prior to their formal presentation. So to sum up, can the public count on a commitment to getting a date when this preliminary report is done, as well as a release of the reports prior to their formal presentation?
Can you answer that one?
Thank you.
Yeah, basically what we had outlined in the schedule of this presentation, I don't remember when the draft is actually due. It's not too far in front of the final, but it's basically the draft would be just for us to do an internal review of it. And then the idea, though, is to present that to the city council first. That's where, I think you guys need to see that information. And then we can release the report to the public. And I think it was like a March 22nd time frame, I think, is the presentation to the council. And then schedule like an open house sometime in April, maybe the 3rd or 4th week. So that gives the public time to review the report in detail. Plus, they've had the presentation here if they choose to come. But if the ones that can't come, they can actually read the written report after it's released, and then attend the open house, and then they can provide public comments back to us at that time. so that way they can really kind of take into account all the cost, all the options, and kind of, basically, have a voice of, what their preferences might be.
Thank you. Next, anybody else? Ms. McBride?
Jane McBride, 3300 Forsyth. My first comments were with regard to the presentation we just heard. One comment I heard is fixed costs do not matter. And then in the next thing I heard was what you really need to take into account is the avoided fixed costs. So we can't have it both ways. Also, everyone that's analyzed these studies have definitely said the missing information. In order to be able to make them comparable and to comment on these studies is to get that fixed cost information. So as far as I'm concerned, that's not acceptable, that we're not getting those fixed costs. We've got to get the fixed costs. That's the only way you can analyze it, and every engineer that's looked at these studies has said so. So I really think that that's, I understand it's a lot of work that you're looking at. 749,000 lines is a lot of work. But that's something that's been asked for by Mr. Heidenauer and others for 3 years. So it's not like this is a sudden something that's been happened, and it was promised at the beginning of this process. So I think that's important. Many of those comments we heard at the end were conclusory. It was these kind of general, broad comments. There was no substance behind them. Comments such as access to market power is limited. I don't understand that whatsoever. There was a number of other comments that were very conclusory in nature, and that's not going to stand. We're going to be asking for the substance behind those as well. The timeline here, I don't understand why we're not getting a deliverable in November. That's what TIA signed up for. TIA should be able to do it. They should be able to provide a preliminary report in November. Where's the problem? Is it with CWLP? Is it the 749,000 lines of fixed costs? What is the problem? It was promised and promised and promised. We cannot, that piece of information should be completed. So I think we really need to look at what's going on here. We need this information as soon as possible. The other thing is that we were looking at this reliability, this customer survey. Did I hear the data 2014 relevant to that study? Things have changed considerably since 2014 in the energy world. So why are we relying on a 2014 study? Why are we relying on comments made in 2014 regarding a 2018 process? So I understand you want your reliability, but I think we've got reliability in other contexts, particularly with some of the energy that's going in at this time. And then there was one other comment I had. Oh, natural gas. All we saw was natural gas prices going up. That's no big surprise. They're going to go up. Anytime you're mining fossil fuel, they're going to go up. We've hit a heyday, yes, they're going to go up. I didn't see anything regarding wind or solar, and I suspect those prices are not necessarily going to go up. We've got something going on right now in the state that highly encourages solar development, and I think that's something that you really need to look at when you're looking at natural gas prices. What about the renewables as well? A couple other comments I wanted to make. On our agenda here for these utility meetings, I think you have many other things that you should be looking at. With Irp Process, IRP is one. The other thing before the utility is Hunter Lake. You're on a schedule with Hunter Lake. The public should know what's going on. I believe we've got public hearings coming up. I think some of the aspects that we're looking at in the IRAP study that was supposed to be done in November should be available before we go into those hearings on Hunter Lake, because there's some very important questions relative to that, and so I think that's something we should be looking at. The other thing that should be on these agenda is the Burns and McDonald report and the ash ponds. You're under a regulatory obligation. I know it's somewhat in flux. We had a big decision out of the D.C. Circuit August 21st regarding that. That should be on your agenda so we all know how these decisions are affecting what you've got in front of you. I see an environmental fund with $15.5 million in it. I see a Burns and McDonald report with $126 $126 million worth of liability for those ash ponds on a very short time schedule. And I think that should be part of your agenda that this committee looks at every time. So I would really hope we could step it up here. We can bring everything to bear. I did see in the study that CWLP is going to start paying attention to FIJA. That effort is being looked at as to what the future is for clean jobs. Municipals have not been in the game. They should be in the game. They're not getting some of the credits they should be able to get. They're staying silent right now on the litigation that's going forward, and they should be part of that. So I hope you can take these to heart. I hope you can look at these, Alderman. You're running a huge municipal utility, and you really need to step out how you're looking at it, please. I ask you to bring some of this information to bear to the public. Thanks much.
Thanks, Ms. McBride. Just so we're clear, we're not going to be talking about the ash ponds because we are in litigation. We are following the regulations. I'm sorry.
I'd like to address that, please. You're under litigation in one lawsuit, okay? You're under federal regulation to meet those requirements. That's not part of your lawsuit. That should be public knowledge as to what your plan is, all right? Council, I question that we cannot talk about ash ponds because you're in a lawsuit. Whatever your settlement discussion is with the Sierra Club, so be it. But your requirements under the federal regulation, you guys should all be looking at that. That's a huge requirement that has nothing to do with that lawsuit. Thank you. Appreciate it.
But we won't be talking about it. Yes.
Just as an additional comment, I did get your email about the issues that you were interested in having on the agenda. Unfortunately, the agenda had already gone out prior to me receiving that email. I did forward it to Director Brown, and he has assured me that those items will be on an upcoming agenda. So I just wanted you to know that, and I think I responded to your email. So I guess I just wanted you to know that we were not ignoring the things, because we did say that we wanted this to be a, everybody to play a role in these meetings, and that they would be, the public's interest would be taken into consideration. So I just wanted you to know that we did get that information, and we will be looking at adding those things to the agenda. Unfortunately, the agenda was already set before I got your email.
Elizabeth, you want to?
Yeah, just one.
Sure.
Chair,
Yes.
just a follow-up comment. We did think this report was coming in November. So was it delayed because there was so much information, or, what is the delay?
Yeah, there's a couple things with it. One was that, when we took the proposals originally, there's a queue. We're not the only IRP that T's working on. So, basically, the time they got approved, there was one, company that jumped ahead of us, or utility, I should say. But also, when we took the time out when we listened to everybody about having the public comments, and we did that up front, and that was a delay that we took on, but it wasn't a day-for-day delay. We got knocked out of the queue by a few other utilities, and that took longer. That's just part of it. We want to do it right. We're not going to rush it. We're going to have all of this comprehensive, forward-looking IRP done correctly. So, the dates are set, and that's what we're going to hold to.
And I would just like to make one other comment. We only received 41 responses to the IRP. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I received more comments on my social media than that about the IRP.
You got a bigger network.
That's right. But literally on 3 different social media platforms, I probably had, and I know Alderman McMenamin saw some of them. We're talking hundreds of comments, and every time I said, go to this website, leave your comments here. So I wish that the public who did want to weigh in actually did weigh in. As someone sitting up here who wants to hear what the public has to say, and I know the people in this room commented. That's not what I'm preaching to the choir. So I just wish that people who are interested in this and have something to add to the conversation in the future would actually add something to the conversation.
Thank you.
And I think that that's one of the issues that I have that really bothers me is that at the beginning of this process, people said we want it to be participatory. We want to have an opportunity to weigh in. And so then we set up all these opportunities, and then when people don't take advantage of them, they want to come back and act like we didn't provide the opportunities. So they're out there, and if people don't take advantage of them, there's absolutely nothing, that we can do about it. We have to go with the information. We have to go with the comments that we received, and I don't know what else to do about that.
One thread on one of my platforms literally had 86 comments.
But that's with you, so you have to somehow translate that and bring it here. Because, I mean, if we have...
I did. We had a website set up. I kept saying, that's not on me. I can't force everyone to go and
making the issue of it,
fill out the survey.
So if they're not responding
I'm not making
to
an issue of it. I'm bringing to the attention that people we've given them the opportunity to be involved.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Mayor?
Two things. One, I guess if you do get comments, just print them out and give them to CWLP. The other item, we just had a conference call with the Energy Authority today about the schedule, and that's what I brought up is, the 6 month, and they want to make sure it's thorough, so we're going to push them as much as possible, but Doug's correct, we want to make sure that we are thorough in the process, so we are continuing to push the Energy Authority, and they'll be coming in December or January, give an update, and it really depends how quickly everything's pulled together. So I think they put together that draft agenda, but it is subject to change based on how fast the process moves along.
Alderman Donlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the ordinance that we originally passed was clear that it would be 6 months. I think it should have been the T's responsibility that if other organizations got put in front of CWLP in the city, then we should have been notified. I mean, we, not only the department, but the governing body, which is the city council, and we just learned about it today. So I'm not directing that at you, Director, but it's at T. I mean, they should have let us know. That would have been helpful to know. I think we all expected something in November. I appreciate and I agree with the concept of doing a thorough job, not rushing it, but it would have been nice to have known about that. Also, as we move forward, my real question, I think that does the preliminary draft that's referenced in the ordinance that we passed back in May, does it go to the utility? Is it shared with the council? Where does it go? Is that going to be shared with the public? I want to have a better understanding of that step in the process.
Yeah, the intention of the draft was basically for an internal review with the utility. We could maybe set up a process for other city officials to review that as well. But the intention would not be necessary to go out to the public yet with that, since it's only in draft form. We don't know any kind of condition of what it is. And again, it's about, we want to make sure that the aldermen are informed of that, I guess, the report and the presentation first before it's released to the public.
Mayor?
I guess my only comment is if it's a draft released to the alderman, then 2 weeks later it should be released to the public because we've all learned what drafts do. So if we're going to release it, everybody gets to see it, or we don't release it, it's for administrative review, then your administration will release it like a week later after we reviewed it and finalize and put it out. So I guess I'd need the Corporation Council or the Energy Authority to, what the recommendation would be. But I think it's all or nothing. I think that's how it should be.
I appreciate your comments. I wasn't really advocating for a draft document to be to release before something is finalized. But however, the ordinance just wasn't specific. So I wanted better clarification, and you provided that. But if at all during the process before something is finalized, if we could be briefed, doesn't mean you have to submit paper copies to each individual member of the council. I think that would be helpful.
I think I can work with the mayor and we can come up with some way to communicate kind of where we stand, and give a little bit more of a detailed status, on an individual basis maybe.
Thank you, Director.
Anyone else? Elizabeth?
Sure.
Hi, good evening. I'm Elizabeth Scrafford. I live at 420 East Kennedy. Thank you for holding this meeting. I think these are going really well. I hope you all are really happy that you made this decision to have quarterly CWLP meetings. I'm learning a lot about line clearance that I didn't know I needed to know. Thank you.
Probably more than you ever wanted to know.
A lot of it was over my head, I'll be honest. But it's interesting, right? What?
You look at light.
Oh, I didn't even know I made a pun. That's how brilliant I am. Thank you for holding the public process for these comments. I think that was really important. Like Alderwoman DeCenso, I saw a lot of people commenting as well. So I would have hoped that more people would have commented, but I think, props to you for opening it up to public comment, because that's what we asked for, and that's really important, and you heard us and you did it. So I just want to say thank you. The last thing I just want to touch on has to do with Hurricane Florence. Alderman Redpath, I heard you say you didn't want to talk about coal ash, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't wave the flag and say, there's been 2 breaches of the coal ash pond in North Carolina. It's a closed coal ash pond that Duke Energy owns. They had a breach on Saturday night and then a breach again today. The rain has not quit falling from the coworkers I've talked to in North Carolina, and the water isn't supposed to crest until Saturday. So it's just a really good reminder for us here in Springfield and across Illinois. We've got a lot of coal ash ponds across the country sitting in flood zones. Springfield isn't the only one. So I think just being aware, I've heard from some people, news outlets are reporting it in writing today. I haven't seen it on the news yet, but I wanted to make sure you all heard that this is a problem that's happening. So as we're looking to the future, we can think of things like, what does it mean for Springfield to have a lot of coal ash sitting in the floodplain?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Don Hanrahan, office address 1119 South 6th, home address 4981 Smith Road, Pleasant Plains. I wanted to make just 2 points. Number one, CWLP can say that they want to exclude from the integrated resource plan money, the coal ash pits, and they want to exclude consideration of water issues. But you're the city council. We have one utility, and all the issues are, in fact, tied together. So a sunk cost is something that's already been spent, and they're telling you coal ash ponds are a sunk cost, so we're not going to talk about those. The problem is they're not. They're a future liability and a future cost. That's not a sunk cost. That's something in the future. It's something that you have to consider in terms of, are you going to keep pumping those coal ashes from the old power plant over to the new one and doing nothing with the coal ash? I don't think it's wise to think that we're going to go on forever and not have to do anything about the coal ash pits. That's number one. Number two, water and coal go together. Units 31, 32, and 33 consume huge amounts of water. Right now, CWLP is also seeking a permit to build a secondary water source because supposedly we won't have enough water every 100 years when the bad drought comes and still run the coal plants. If you're going to build a whole secondary water source essentially to keep your coal plants running, what if you don't have coal plants to keep running? Why are you going to build another lake? The two things go together. And now we're being told, I thought we were going to have an IRP by November, and the timetable for Hunter Lake has now been pushed out to, maybe a supplemental environmental study by the end of the year, maybe not till early next year. But I thought, well, that's good. We'll have an integrated resource plan to look at these coal plants before there's ever a public hearing or anything to do with getting the permit for Hunter Dam. But now that's all screwed up. You're the city council, and whether they're going to talk about water issues and coal issues at the same time or not, you guys have to think like that. And that's my only point. And part of the whole cost issue on the integrated resource plan. What resources will we continue? It's not a straight cost analysis, just like they described. There's other factors too. You're going to commit the city to years and years and years and years and years and years of maintenance on a lake that we don't even need. That doesn't make any sense. And so failure to consider the cost savings that you would accrue by not having to build a secondary water source in your integrated resource plan seems to me to be a huge mistake, and something that whether CWLP wants to include it in an IRP or not, you all are going to have to think about it. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
When we talk about the ash ponds and the IRP, we talk about a sunk cost. Yeah, sunk cost usually what's incurred in the past, but you have to think about the ash ponds as a cost that we're going to incur no matter what. So, whether in the future we're going to have to close them. So it doesn't matter if we have a unit on or not, because if we keep units on, we're going to have to do dry ash conversion. That means there's no more ash going to the ash ponds. So the IRP process has got the environmental costs included for capital expenditures needed if the units stay. And it would not include ash ponds costs to close them because it's a sunk cost. But it is a future cost that this city is going to incur no matter what for the utility. When we talk about water use, I do agree that you really need to take into account, when we're looking at a secondary water source, what's going to happen if we shut down those units? The environmental impact statement already includes that analysis. We've already committed in that study to say that, by certain years, these units are gone. So when you're looking at a very long-term study, I don't remember, Ted, what's the number of years? To 2065. It already takes into account what water usage is needed now and what is the future water use. So, when you're looking at that, we've already considered the impact to closing those units and what our purpose and need is of a secondary water source. So that study will function properly on its own. The IRP does not need to take into account whether we build a second lake or not, or a pipeline or whatever other needs that we need for a secondary water source.
And plus, we don't know what the recommendations are going to be and what the city council is going to agree to at this point.
That's correct. The Army Corps will make some recommendations.
We don't want to get the cart before the horse.
Right.
So, Jim, do you have something? Oh.
No, sir.
Anyone else care to address the committee? If not, we'll move on to. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Alderman get to talk too, right?
What?
We get to talk too, right, Chuck? Yeah.
Well, if I let you, go ahead.
Thanks for letting the Alderman talk, Chuck.
You're welcome, Joe.
So I thought there's very good comments out there. And Micah, you had the toughest job tonight, clearly. I thought you did a good job on, discussing the comments that were formally received through the formal process. And you discussed, risk and historical pricing trends and from the past and future pricing trends that we might expect and so forth, all very valuable. But although I think the off-scope, some of the off-scope items, they are subject to debate, as we've just heard. Also, when we got to the fixed costs, and the statement that, quote, fixed costs don't matter, that really hit me also. And then in the discussion, I think we need to go deeper into which costs are fixed. And from an accounting background, which goes back 40 years for me, there's variable costs and there's fixed costs. So the example on the slides of a tractor moving around coal, if you're moving coal to 4 plants and then you end up later just moving coal to 1 plant, I presume we're moving less coal. So from my point of view, that's a variable cost because you need less men on the tractor and you've got less tractor time. So that, to me, that's a variable cost. So I didn't really agree with the slide there. And I do think we really need to get deeper into what costs go away if we retire plants 1, 2, and 3, particularly maintenance costs and infrastructure improvements to the plant. So I think we could have gone a little bit deeper or more fully into those areas tonight. Micah?
That comment was meant to be a little bit inflammatory, I guess, but yes, fixed costs would be a good way of understanding historically in a given situation how well you performed. So we are going to do variable costs. We are going to do capital expenditures. We are going to look at fixed costs, but not fixed costs that would allow us to understand the performance. It's an extraordinary effort that doesn't bear fruit. So we will be looking at fixed costs as you described, and if this plant no longer exists, which fixed costs are eliminated? So maintenance cost is a fixed cost. Which one of those are eliminated? I agree with you that the bulldozer has a lot of variable cost to it. The $600,000 is all fixed. Then after that, you pay for fuel and operator. Well, I guess he's fixed as well. But yes, many fixed costs involved with that. But that particular fixed cost only goes away when you're no longer in the coal business.
So you're just talking about the machine itself.
Correct.
That's a fixed cost as opposed to operational costs related to that machine. Okay, right. I understand where you're coming from on that. Right. I think it was inadequate, but I understand.
No, I do understand. I did oversimplify, absolutely. I did my best to explain that we're not organizing it as an accountant would. We're organizing it like a person who has a business decision in front of him needs to organize it. And that is, where are the fixed cost savings, not what are your fixed costs. So if we end up retiring all of our plants and we still have $10 million a year in fixed costs, it's not worth considering. That $10 million lives through the retirements. We're not worried about that. We need to know how much goes away. So it's a very complicated topic when you start talking about the different types of costs, and I wish I would have explained it better, and I still do.
Thanks. Anything else? Well, now, is there any unfinished business to come before the committee? Any new business to come before the committee? We don't have an executive session? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Good job, guys.
I have to mention, I kind of remember, so that's